What's up, suckers? Today, first off, would like to introduce you to that butthole. That butthole belongs to our new puppy named Cirilla, after Ciri from Witcher. And she is adorable. And I'm also going to somewhat be watching her in the background because that's what I'm supposed to be doing right now. And if she pees or poops on the floor, I'm going to have to stop. So you also might get to watch me chase after a dog peeing on my floor. You're welcome. Today, I wanted to go ahead and talk about something that people talk about pretty often on ADHD channels, but I wanted to discuss it in terms of how to make it work for you. Because once you understand how your brain works, it's a lot easier to work with it, right? Okay, so without further ado, let's get into how to make ICNU work for you. Hey everybody, what's up? Before we move on, as usual here in YouTube land, I ask that if you are liking this channel, if you're liking me, if you feel like everything that I'm offering is helping you out, please like and subscribe. It's how I find new people. It's how new people find me. And I don't know, if you do it, I'll give you a shiny new dime. Try not to think about the fact that I'm in Costa Rica and we don't have dimes here. For those of you who are coming back, welcome back. For those of you who are just checking in, just to introduce myself a bit, my name is Ariana Bradford. I have done a number of things in my life thanks to the ADHD need to always have something new. I have been a writer, a blogger, I don't know what you want to call it, mommy blogging brand. And now I am an ADHD productivity coach who basically just tries to help people with brains like ours to understand that productivity can still be done, that things can still get done, we just are different, and that we have different brains that need to be worked with. So with that, enjoy my dog cleaning her hoo-ha, and let's get into the ICNU acronym. If you already know what this is, you can go ahead and forward on through to how to make it work. But for those of you who don't know or have never really heard it, or you've seen it and kind of need a little bit more of an idea of what it means, I'm going to go ahead and help you with that right now by just giving you a short rundown. So I don't really know where it comes from. I heard it on Reddit, and usually when people say I heard it on Reddit, that generally means it's not to be believed. But in this particular case, it's really spot on. If anybody in the comments happens to know who started talking about ICNU, let me know because I'd love to give them credit because it's bang on. ICNU stands for interest, challenge, novelty or newness, and urgency. These are the four things that ADHD brains really need to be able to function. If one of those four things are not connected to a task that we are trying to do, executive dysfunction kicks in and we aren't good for shit. We won't do it. And there are a lot of things out there that will say that, the ICNU is kind of the only thing you need, and that's not true. Obviously, there are other things that play into it, right? There's hormones, medication, how you've been sleeping, but ICNU is an amazing way to see exactly what your problem is with the task that you're trying to do, and then from there on to kind of play with it a little bit to address whatever you feel that task is missing that won't give you that sweet, sweet dopamine that you feel that you need. And just to, kind of give you a little bit of a personal idea of what that might feel like, it doesn't necessarily have to be something you don't want to do for ICNU to play into things. For example, when I sit down to write a book, I love writing. The writing portion is the best part of my whole process. I've self-published before. Everything else fucking sucks, but the writing portion is so much fun. I love it. I really do. So it doesn't really make sense for me to not want to do it, right? However, there have been times where I have sat down, my laptop has been in my lap. It's been 2 hours and I still haven't started writing. And there's nothing to do with me not wanting to do it. It's missing one of the ICNUs, or it's actually a little bit too much of the ICNU. And in that case, for me, it's the challenge portion, right? I fear sitting down and writing and coming up with complete shit, which is why when I was a kid, I literally started, I think, like 200 stories and never finished one, because if there's one thing that ADHDers are very good at, it's giving up as soon as things stop being fun. There are ways to kind of work past that. Will it always work? No, but that's why it's important to know what to do. My puppy is playing with a like cardboard paper towel roll. I don't know, man. It's cute. You're just gonna have to listen to that, the dulcet tones of her playing with cardboard while I talk. Where was I? Where was I, Ciri? All right, ICNU. So this is what you want to do if you get caught up in an executive dysfunction situation. The first thing you want to ask yourself is this an ICNU situation? Because sometimes it's not, right? Sometimes you have plenty of one of those four things, and so that's not the problem. And it could be more that you fear, it's a perfectionism thing, or it's an energy thing, or it's a time thing, or, maybe it is something that you don't want to do just because you don't want to do it. And in that particular case, ICNU doesn't play into it. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, if you do figure out it's an ICNU situation, you need to figure out which of those four. And when we're talking about our brains, it doesn't really make sense for you to just think about it, because you could get distracted, you could get overwhelmed, you could wind up not really being able to visualize exactly what the problem is. So I would suggest writing down for each of those four things what it might be. I actually, by the way, have a printable worksheet that can also be downloaded into any sort of PDF edit software, whatever. I cannot think of words today. And basically, you're just going to go ahead and fill it out anytime that you're going through an executive dysfunction situation. And it's not gated. It's for free. You don't have to sign up for any sort of like email newsletter thing from me. Basically, it's just to help you out, because this is a very big way of being able to go over what your problem might be. So you're going to kind of write down, is it lacking interest? And if not, what is the interest? Is it lacking challenge? Is it lacking newness or novelty? Or is it lacking urgency? Once you're ready to move forward, now it's time to address whatever you feel that your task is lacking. And there are a few ways that you can do each one. Obviously, every task is different, but I'm going to give you a few universal ways that I would suggest trying. I'm also going to give you guys a little bit of a difficulty scale, 1 to 4. 1 is it's really, really easy for you to address this, and 4 is trying not to shit yourself while whitewater rafting after a binge eat at Taco Bell. So we're going to start, obviously, with interest. And interest is actually probably the third most difficult, because if you're not interested in something, it's really hard to force yourself to be interested in something. And I suppose you could try, right? You could definitely, I don't know, if you're able to be that creative, if you've got a TPS report, I don't even know what those are, by the way. I just learned it from Office Space, because that's how I learn things, from movies. You should trust me. Anyway, so if you're doing a report that, you're not interested in, I guess you could pretend that it's actually a report about something interesting, but for most adults, that's going to be very, very difficult. So interest is very hard to force, which means that if you are having an issue with interest, you are going to have to annex interest. What do I mean by that? My dog is eating a sticker. Give me 1 second.
Ciri, pup. We don't eat the stickers. No eat the stickers. No eat the stickers.
You just got to hear my puppy voice, and you know what? I'm not even sorry or embarrassed, because if you don't talk to puppies with a high, cute voice, you're broken inside. Who hurt you? Basically make the task interesting, and that can be done by either making the task itself interesting or by tying it to something that you really enjoy doing. The second way is really best for little things, for things that you have more control over, brushing teeth, writing essays, chaperoning a kid's school party. I totally love kids' school parties. I'm a great parent. I'm not the one to automatically sign up to bring napkins and paper plates. What? You basically want to, in those situations, do something like watch fun videos while you're brushing your teeth. If you're writing an essay, obviously write it about something that really means something to you so that you stay interested. Making the actual task interesting is, well, the essay situation kind of fits there. It could be kind of adding one of the other three options, making it challenging, making it urgent, things like that. But basically making it so that it is not the usual humdrum that you have been trying to avoid. That said, as I mentioned, it's really hard to add interest to things. And so the thing I generally tend to suggest is adding interest by thinking of the things that you want to do or are really interested in that come after. So, for example, if you have to, I don't know, you have to do a balance sheet, you're really not great with numbers and math, you hate it, you really don't want to do it, but doing this balance sheet is going to help you figure out how much money you have to spend on shit you really want to do. Focus on that. Focus on the fact that while the actual act of doing the balance sheet is not interesting for you and you would rather dig your own eyes out with spoons than do finances, once you're done, you are going to be able to look at all the interesting things you want. It's going to become interesting because then you're going to be looking at what you can spend your money on. The only thing that I would say is that you want to beware jumping ahead. Some people are the kind of people who will think about that and say, okay, well, I could just go ahead and, buy this ATV and then I'll see what money is left over and I'll go through that. You don't necessarily want to do that. And you can avoid it by making sure that you write down all of the steps in order so that you can keep track of what you're supposed to be doing when. And that way, it's a lot easier too for you to kind of go down the list and find what you're going to be interested in next or first so that you can make that your source of interest earlier on in the process. And now we're on to challenge. Challenge is a little bit easier. It is not horribly hard, but it's not horribly easy. You're going to find that challenge is easy for some things and hard for others. Because, for example, it's really hard to make doing laundry challenging, which can kind of mess with your process a bit. But other than that, making things challenging can be super, super fun and interesting depending on how you do it. It can be as simple as saying, okay, I want to see if I can get this done in 5 minutes. And then trying to beat your best record. Think about tossing out trash in an office, and sometimes people don't want to toss away their trash, but the moment that you make it into like a basketball shooting, sports ball, touchdown, hat trick situation, once you make it so that there is a challenge to throwing out that trash, you would find that a lot of people will sometimes even make more trash so that they can see if they can sink a basket before other people in the office, right? There is something that is fun to us about being challenged. So essentially what you want to do is you want to find a way to make things that are boring or too easy more challenging. That can be difficult, again, when you have certain things that you have to do a certain way, like I said, a balance sheet, right? You can't really, if it's easy for you, it's not like you can make that more challenging. I mean, math is kind of math. But you can still kind of see like how fast you get it done with 100% accuracy. There are challenges that you can add, but especially if you're already kind of putting your mind towards getting something done, it can be kind of a pain in the ass to try to think of how to make it more challenging. So while adding challenges are probably my number one suggestion, number two would essentially be very, very similar to my first suggestion, which would be to try to find challenge later on in the project, or try to look at the non-challenging parts as part of a whole. So, for example, if you have to write an email, and it's a super easy email, and it's just really like, ugh, I really don't want to do this. It's, not challenging at all, and therefore I just really don't want to do it. As you can see, challenge and interest are very closely aligned and very closely tied, and so you'll find that you'll have no interest because there's no challenge. So the best thing to do is to kind of see it as part of a whole. Maybe you're sending this email because you have a huge project going on that has more challenging parts, and in order to get to that challenging part, you have to send the email. So you send the email, you get an answer back, and now you get to play. Now your brain gets to get challenged, right? And now you have more interest. So it's probably best to try to think of a way to think of that non-challenging task as part of a greater portion that's going to be extremely challenging. Now, another thing that I want to warn you about, and I've touched on this earlier, is making things too challenging. Because especially when we're talking about executive dysfunction, things get too hard or too challenging. A lot of ADHD brains, especially if you're not medicated or if you're just having a bad day, will dig in and make it so that you can't get it done. So you always want to make sure that whatever challenge you're shooting for is not going to be something that is way outside of your skill set, or way outside of the amount of time or energy you have available. Going back to the finance sheet, right? You've been balancing your finances, you've got this balance sheet going on, it has to be done a certain way, maybe you're like ace at math and this is boring as hell. And you can do a couple things to make it challenging, I already gave you those, but going overboard would be an example of saying, okay, I could go ahead and throw in a bunch of formulas, but instead of doing that, I'm actually going to try to see if I can get 5 of these done at once with no formulas put in to automatically calculate things for me. So I'm going to calculate everything by myself, 5 of these, and I want them done in the hour. Unless you are a fucking genius, you are going to wind up overloading yourself. Something could happen where you wind up getting another project, or you have to take a lunch, or your brain suddenly gets super tired. Now you're only 2 or 3 deep. You have 2 others or 3 others that haven't gotten done, and now you don't want to do it anymore. And now you're not getting it done, or you have to go back and fix your sheets by adding in formulas and doing all this other stuff, and now you're not getting the stuff done that you wanted to get done. So just don't overdo it, is what I'm saying. So now we're to the third thing, and that is novelty. Novelty is the absolute hardest. It's number 4, because you can't make something that is not new. It's not possible, Going back to the toothbrushing example, brushing your teeth, I don't care what you do, you're not going to make it new. You can get a new toothbrush, you can get a new toothpaste, but that's not new anymore after a day or so. I guess if you get like a really exciting toothbrush, maybe you could possibly make it more exciting for like a week. I'm thinking about this way too hard. That's how you could tell that, well, honestly, I wanted to pretend that that's different, but it's really not. Things that are not new are just not going to be new anymore. And so that is not something that you can necessarily add. So I touched on it a little bit, that depending on what it is, you may need to just make some part of the process new. For example, if you usually work at a particular desk and you're about to do something that you don't like, maybe you change locations. Maybe you go to a local cafe, or you try to sit in your kitchen instead of your bedroom. You have to, in that particular case, give it something new that may not necessarily be part of the task. And this, I have found in my experience, works about 50% of the time, because, you know, the problem is generally the task, right? Not necessarily where you're doing it or how you're doing it. So it can be kind of a trial and error situation to figure out exactly what newness you need to make it so that the process is more novel and something that you want to do much more than when you first started it. And there are a lot of things you could try. You know, if it's a process that you're very intimate with, you could always try a new way of doing it, maybe trying to see if there's a more efficient way to do it, or maybe a more fun way of doing it. If it's not something that you're necessarily able to do because it really doesn't have a lot of steps, I usually use washing dishes or laundry because those things don't generally have a lot of steps to it. At that point, the novelty really isn't going to be there. And so at that point, you're probably also struggling with the I or the C. And so at that point, it's probably best to just try to shoot for one of those others instead of newness, because just newness is so closely tied to time and tied to circumstances, I think is the word I'm looking for here, that you can't really control whether or not something is new. And so if the newness is wearing off, if the newness is bothering you, generally you are able to tweak one of the other three to make up for that lack of newness, but you're not really going to be able to add newness or novelty. And I hope that made sense. And if it didn't, I don't know, tell me it did. I'm very, very vulnerable today. So, or to the last one, to the fourth one, urgency. This is by far the easiest thing to add or to fix. It only has, it's like on that scale of 1 to 4, it is absolutely a 1. It's so simple that like my puppy could do it, and she can't even figure out whether or not she's supposed to eat tinfoil versus puppy food. So you can do it. With urgency, it's probably one of the biggest motivators for a lot of ADHD brains, because if we don't have something pushing us to get something done on time, or if that urgency is quite obviously not set in stone, we tend to kind of jump around and avoid something, right? And you know, if you've been watching my channel for any amount of time, you know that I am not a person who believes in pushing yourself too far when you don't have the energy or the time to do something. And so things that have flexible deadlines or end dates, I totally think that that is something that you can put off for a couple of days. However, it's only a couple of days. So for example, I've mentioned that I hate doing dishes. I would rather wipe myself with a Brillo pad than do dishes. And that is something that doesn't really have a pressing deadline. So if I've got something that does have a pressing deadline, that's usually one of the first things that's going to be moved to tomorrow. But as anyone who actually has dealt with a house full of dishes before knows, you can't put it off forever. So eventually it is going to become an urgent problem. And this is where we kind of have this paradox, right? Because usually somebody would probably assume that I would say, wait until there's urgency. But for things like dishes, trash, brushing teeth, taking showers, for things like that, if you wait until it's urgent, you're essentially waiting until you have a hygiene problem, a smell problem, you know, bugs. Like, you really don't want to wait until things are that serious, generally. So what you have to do is you have to force urgency in those particular situations. And forcing urgency can look like a couple of things. It can look like accountability, which is calling people who you're friends with, who you know will call you in a certain amount of time to check to see if you're done. But if you really don't want to trust people like that, which I can totally understand, you also can do things like set alarms on your phone, really loud, obnoxious alarms that you absolutely hate the sound of. You could also try to do an if-then situation where, you're basically telling yourself, I really want to do this one thing and I can't do it until I have finished this thing. And I want to do this, whatever it is, right now or in 30 minutes. And so I need to be done with this other thing in 30 minutes. You can give yourself that accountability, or you can force the urgency by forcing a deadline if you trust yourself that much. But a lot of people have admitted that forcing a deadline on themselves is ultimately asking for failure, because they're like, what am I gonna do? Spank myself? And I mean, I'm not here to judge what you do in your spare time, but that can be a problem. So another way to force that urgency is to actually give yourself a looser deadline, which I know kind of goes against... I'm taking shit out of my puppy's mouth. Like, I don't know, guys. This is crazy. The way to force urgency is actually counterintuitive, but it's to set yourself a much lighter deadline than it's got to be done by 7 p.m. It's got to be done by tomorrow. Because usually when you do that, you actually kind of are towing that thin line between giving yourself a deadline that you want to meet and freaking yourself out to the point where you're going to freeze. And it is a thin line, but it is one that you can probably feel out by knowing whether or not saying that you have to get something done in 4 hours has suddenly made you not want to do it. And I'm going to give you an example of how that worked for me. So I wrote a book a while ago, released it in 2020, and I did it by writing every day. And I was unmedicated at this point. I didn't even know I had ADHD. But what I automatically could tell is if I told myself with absolutely no wiggle room, I was absolutely going to fall off the wagon, and I didn't want to do that. So what I did is I gave myself some leeway, and I said, okay, I want to write every day. I want to write every day at 5:30 in the morning, 6 o'clock in the morning, which by the way was a huge mistake because I was not a morning person. So also take your own best times and things like that into account. Don't forget I said that. But I told myself that I wanted to write at a certain time every day. And I decided I wanted to make it a little bit easier on myself by saying that if I ever had days where I just didn't feel ready to write, I felt blocked, I felt like I needed a break, I was allowed, but it could not be more than 48 hours. And allowing myself that space to be tired sometimes, to not want to do things, it made it so that I had that deadline, I had that urgency, right? But at the same time, I knew that that urgency was not going to take over my life. It didn't encroach on my productivity because it helped me feel like if I wasn't ready to do something, I didn't need to be perfect. I could have that space to be able to do other things, to be honest with myself, to be tired or grumpy or hungry or whatever, and it didn't have to get done. So it added urgency by making it so that when I took days off, I know that I only had 48 hours, and it made it so that I still wanted to do things every day, but it stopped me from freezing up. So when you are adding urgency to a task for things like washing dishes, brushing teeth, doing a report that you don't want to do at work or for yourself, the best way to move past that is to tell yourself that you need to get it done, right? And if it has a set deadline, perfect. Then it needs to get done by a certain amount of time, and then you can cut it into pieces and get to that time that you're supposed to be getting to, that deadline. But if it doesn't have a set deadline, then you either can go ahead and set a hard deadline for yourself, or if you know that you are likely to blow off that deadline once you set it, then go ahead and set yourself a deadline that has conditions, but that still allows you room to be you. And that can look like going back to that financial sheet. You have to do it for yourself. You know you have to get it done for Q2. but you also know that if you tell yourself, I have to have this done by April 30th, you're gonna get to April 30th and be like, fuck that. Then at that point, don't do that to yourself. Say, okay, I wanna get this done by the end of Q2, and it would be great if I got it done by April 30th, but even if I don't have it done by April 30th, I at least want to be halfway finished. And at that point, you've kind of set yourself a more reachable goal, it's a more malleable goal, and it's not freaking you out to the point where you're thinking that you're just not gonna do it because it sounds like too much work. So I hope that helped. I apologize if I seem distracted, but my puppy has tried to so far eat a Lego cardboard, a user manual for something in German, and I'm not quite sure what else. So I have had to have many moments where I've had to stop her from eating it, eating things. And I believe it's lunchtime. So I am going to go get food for her, food for me, and then I'm going to be forced to go stand in mounds of Costa Rican ants so that she can take a shit, because this is my life. Anyway, if this helped you out at all, if this channel sounds like your kind of thing, please like, subscribe, share, and I will see you guys in the next video. Drink water, take care of yourselves. Bye.